Welcome to the 2026 series of Psychoanalytic Conversations. I'm Pani Madubela, an Executive Director of the Institute for Rediscovering Psychoanalysis. The intention of this series of webinars is to stimulate thoughtful discussions of topics that are of significant human interest, yet topics that are often not engaged by psychoanalytic organizations, whose focus is exclusively that of clinical theory and practice. If you have ideas for future topics that the Institute might address, please contact us at our email address, info@rediscoveringpsychoanalysis.org. We hope you enjoy and feel educational benefit from this webinar. Thank you.
If I stopped and started giving the biographical sketch and the professional accomplishments of this group of panelists, we would be here till 9 o'clock. So we're not going to do that. Rather, I'm going to give a rather personalized introduction to each of the, let's not call them panelists, let's call them conversationalists, because what I hope to instigate is a conversation between all of you, which will be educational to anyone who listens in. So I'm going to give a rather personalized introduction. I know that that's easy to be offended, that I managed to leave out some major accomplishments you've done, but I'm going to say how I picked this panel. And the interesting thing, which is a background note, is that every single person I invited was enthusiastic to do it. So there must be something about this topic that engages the interest of theatre professionals in the theatre and performance arts, that interests them, that everyone was keen to do it. And I kept emphasizing that the point actually is to try to educate people who are not in the theatrical professions about what your skills are that they could benefit from learning about. Now, how I picked people was as follows. I'm going to do it in no particular order. Rinus Spanoides was wanting to come tonight and at the last minute was not able to. I met when he performed Dimitri Tsefendos, in the play at the Market Theatre, Strange Land. And he was a one-man show, and he played the part of this prisoner being tortured under the old dispensation. You probably know the story. And the interesting thing about how the direction was done was that as the audience entered, he was already there, in role, shivering and shaking and terrified. And it was amazing in its impact. Now, my late wife, June Krause, Sipho's mother, was a good friend of Rinus's. And so after the performance, she said, well, we must wait and take him out for a drink. I said, are you crazy? How on earth can we possibly have a drink with someone who's been so immersed in that role in such an incredibly powerful way? But lo and behold, he came out and we had a cup of cocoa together at a local restaurant, and he was charming and lovely. And I kept thinking, how does such an accomplished actor get out of the role? Sadly, Rinus can't be here. He's had an emergency. Now, another inspiration for this is actually Samantha Peo, because Samantha was a very good friend of June Krause's, and she has been involved in the musical Chicago for many years in the two main roles, and was playing Velma in the international touring performance for almost 3 years, 7 performances a week, negligible vacation time, living with the same cast day in, day out. And then suddenly COVID hit, and Samantha found herself back in her apartment in Bryanston and finding I think it's fair to say, Samantha, you had a heroic struggle sort of reorienting yourself to not being Velma. And Samantha and I talked quite a bit at the time, I think partly because we were both grieving June, and also because the topic fascinated me as a psychoanalyst. How do you get out of a role? Another invitee that was important, who unfortunately can't be here, was Pamume uh, Mathombene. I think I've got the pronunciation right, but Phala, please correct me. And I saw she
Mthombeni,
was the lead. Sir,
Mthombeni,
say Muthombeni.
Mthombeni.
Thank you. Muthombeni. If you try to get my pronunciation right, really correctly, we'll be here all night coaching me. She was the lead role in Isitha Sabantu, and it was absolutely amazing. And it was a mind-blowing production. It was brilliant. The entire cast was brilliant. But she was particularly striking to me, not only because she was fantastic as a performer, but at the end, everyone comes to take their bow, and I was right in the front row, right a meter away from her. And I hope I'm not disclosing anything that would offend her. I have spoken to her about this. And most of the audience was like happy. They're taking a bow, they know they've done a great job. It looked to me as though she was still in a trance. And I wondered, how the hell do you get into such a powerful role and then jump out of it? All right, already you've got the audience applauding and so forth, but that can't be enough. I wouldn't have thought. And also in that production was Tony Miyambo, who is here tonight. And Tony played the lead role in The Ape, which was an internationally award-winning production. And everyone, Tony, who saw you and who saw how you transformed between species in the moment and so forth, was actually blown away by your talent. But one thing that several people noticed, including myself, was that when the performance came to the end, you actually, before just jumping up and taking your bow and people were jumping up and down, giving you a standing ovation, you actually turned away for a few seconds. And I wondered about that too. Just how difficult is it to get out of a role? We're also lucky to have Phala here tonight, who wrote the play The Ape and directed the production. And Phala and I have become friends. And we were talking one night about, do directors generally think about how to help actors get out of the role? They think a lot about how to get into the role, but getting out is also surely a considerable challenge. We also have Klaus-Louis van Vuuren here, who is not only an actor but also a classical musician. And he played in The Fatherland and got an LAD nomination for his role in The Fatherland, in which he plays four very different roles, very different characters, shifting from one to another. I read the reviews. Sadly, I never got to see the production. He also teaches Lieder, which June Krause was very, very fond of. And Lieder is a highly emotional musical vocal modality. And he has become, because of that, as I understand it, particularly interested in emotional transformation and how that works. And he teaches on that grounds. And then last but not least, we have June Krause's son, whose family I am proud to be a member of, who for 5 years played the role of Ajax in Generations, one of the most popular South African TV shows ever. And Sipho was known as Ajax. And when I first met you, Sipho, I think we were at a family gathering. I was new to the family, and we were sent out to get beer or something like that. And we walked into a Checkers or place like that, and suddenly every cashier, I don't know about the men, but certainly the women, was Ajax, Ajax, Ajax. And I think that was even, you had by that time lost your dreads. So it wasn't even that you had the distinctive dreads, as I recall. And what struck me was, all right, here you have a job. You are Ajax on a TV program that is enormously popular. But in a certain sense, you can't lose being Ajax when you go out and buy beer or a bottle of wine for yourself. You were there. And it still is somewhat today the case that people recognize you as Ajax or later in your career as Sipho. So when you look at this group of people, the however many there are of us now, 6 of us here, 7 including, no, I can't count. Don't worry about it. There is an incredible amount of talent here. I actually feel very, very honored to have you all here. I'm sad that Venus can't join us. I'm glad that Pume can't join us, but we still have more than enough. Now, what you're tasked with is, as much as you feel comfortable to be autobiographical, talking about how you get out of roles and what the challenges are getting out of a role. When you think about it, everyone, the general public, all live in different roles at different times and shift roles and so forth. They come home from working as a bank accountant, they're with their lover or whatever. They're shifting roles all the time. But by and large, most members of the public don't think self-consciously about how do they shift that role? What does it mean? What is its emotional tax? What are its costs? What are its challenges? This is hugely important for psychoanalysts and psychotherapists. This is my final words, and then I'm going to let you all have at it. Because when you think about it as a psychoanalyst, for whatever number of hours of patients I see a day, 6, 7, 8, 9, I've even done 10 hours a day. If I'm any good as a psychoanalyst or psychotherapist, if I'm any good at it, I'm intensely emotionally engaged with the patient who is in front of me. Intensely. And then the 50 minutes is up and I have 10 minutes, not just to drink a glass of water and urinate, but I have 10 minutes in some ways to shift my engagement with that patient, because I've now got to be engaged with another patient who may have a completely different emotional constellation to present to me. So psychoanalysts have not thought enough about how they do this. And of course, at the end of your day also, you're supposed to come home and stop being a professional and start being a partner, a lover, a father, or whomever. So I think that psychoanalysts and mental health professionals could benefit with a lot more understanding of what are the ways in which you get out of roles. What are the processes? What are the procedures? Are there rituals involved? Because I know that for me, and I can talk about this later, there are rituals between sessions and there are rituals at the end of the day. They're almost shamanic, actually, but they're important to me in sort of shifting gears emotionally. Having given that rather long introduction, but I think probably an important one to frame the conversation that we're going to have for the next hour and a half, I'm tempted to say, who wants to start? Or shall I flip a coin? Or shall we go ladies first, since you were in a way the original inspiration of this with the challenge you had stopping being Velma? Would you like to each say something about your reactions to this topic and how you've approached the issues personally? Sammy?
Well, as you were speaking, Barnaby, there were so many thoughts that came up. And one of them was the fact that you, as a psychoanalyst, almost reminds me of the role of a director. It's almost like somebody who has to focus solely, intentionally on one particular person, and then and absolutely devote all his time and energy to that person, and then almost shift to someone else. And I'll never forget, actually, and I'll use my own experience of this, is because I never studied tertiary education in dramatic arts. I was studying from the time that I was a youngster. I was doing private classes, and then I was lucky enough to get into the arts. And so most of it was instinctive. But I do remember having my very first experience of working with a director when I thought to myself, my gosh, this is a person who understands human behavior. So it was a director, and it was Chicago. The very first time I did Chicago was in 2005. And we had this phenomenal director. His name was Scott Farris. And I just remember working with him in the audition process and him absolutely understanding the depths and the layers of the character that I was auditioning for. Absolutely understanding it on a mental, emotional, spiritual background, character backstory. Also, just the idea that this is just a character within the realm of an entire story and what the character was supposed to serve in the entire story, but was getting to know me in the audition process and understanding how to direct me or prompt me to get to where I was supposed to go. And that intensified within the rehearsal process. I will never forget him at work, working with all of these cast members and realizing we are all so different. And yet he had this immense understanding of how to reach me, how to reach Velma at that stage, how to reach the other characters, how to reach the ensemble members, and then create this entire whole. So when you talk about psychoanalysts and your role in understanding someone's process and what you're working with them, actually, a director is doing kind of what you're doing. Isn't that interesting to bring that up? Anyone else have anything to say about that? For me, that's striking. It's striking in the similarity.
Anyone wants to jump in, please jump in and riff off whatever has just been said by the other person, or add your own perspective on things.
Please do.
If you all start talking at once, I will pull my rank as the pseudo chairman of this conversation.
Well, I'll say something. So my name is Tony Bonani Miyambo, and as Barnaby mentioned, I've been performing a show called Kafka's Ape. And this year is the 15th year that we've been performing and touring Kafka's Ape, which is a solo show that I've collaborated on Phala with. And in many ways, it's been kind of the building blocks and cementing of our own career as theater makers, as storyers, but also as company owners. We own a company called Nomayini, which is focused on telling and crafting story across the board, from based on our different skill set. So I've been performing essentially the same character in this particular show on and off for 15 years. So there's something interesting.
If I can just jump in there, Tony,
Yeah.
I'm apologize because when I introduced you, I had forgotten how long you've been doing that role. And that is
No problem.
That is something. Please continue.
No problem. No, so there's something very interesting about a return, and returning to something that is still something that I'm unpacking and unraveling for myself. Also, another interesting thing, which is a return on this call, is I used to be part of a studio audience that was bussed in from a township outside of Johannesburg to come and participate in a show that Sipho used to present on called Yo TV. And it's very strange to me to be sitting in a call with Sipho, because we were bussed in with a promise that if you're good and if you behave and if you're interesting enough, maybe one day you'll get to be a presenter. And of course, that was never going to happen. And we had to pay a fee to this man who used to take us to Yo TV. And there's an interesting thing that I learned from being part of that process, which was interesting because by the time a certain time came in the shooting cycle of the show, a lot of the kids would just be tired and bored and drifting off. But I was always very captured by the way in which Sipho and the other presenters of the kids show used to be able to turn on and turn off. There's something special that happened when the camera rolled and when they called action. And I was very curious. I think there was an awareness of this ability to pick something up, to turn on, and to put something down, to stand down. And I think that was kind of my first understanding of what it means to perform, the kind of rigor and repeat that it requires. And it's kind of a thing that, you know, laid, it's laid in the conscious. We got this call, and a very much a thing that Phala and I have worked really hard to understand how to be very economical with and harness for the sake of the performance, for the benefit of the performance. And in many ways, you know, the special thing about being a performer is being able to dip your hands into the fires of hell and then pull it out and to say to people, I'm still fine. It was just a performance. And there's something that's very interesting to me in that. So I'm just connecting a few different things together just to move the conversation along. But yeah, it's very, very, very happy to be here and in conversation with you about it all.
I mean, just because Tony's next to me, I feel compelled to say something because we're still, you know, unmuted. So don't we are actually on set, you know. So if you see my hair looking like, you know, this is because we are playing some, you know, old characters here, you know, on set. So that's what is, you know, they've gracefully been able to also just give us a little bit of time because we had, you know, communicated with them about this. But for me, what is, you know, I mean, I normally listen to, you know, to words that people choose to use whenever they describe something, you know, and maybe that will be a little bit of my role today to just repeat some of the words that, you know, are being said because they say something. I've come to, you know, working with Tony over the years also to understand the importance of ritual in you know, dealing with stories. I call myself, and you know, Tony and I, we call ourselves storiers because, you know, more than storytellers or theater makers, because we understand the deeper impact of story in and what and how one becomes one with the story, and like where you have to find the space between yourself and the story as the carrier and the embodier of story, you know, in that kind of a process that, you know, becomes a symbiotic process between whoever and however the story is told, because or the story is portrayed rather, because in you being a story for me is that it is not just about what is being said or what is being acted, but it's also the process in between. It's about how somebody, you know, uses breath, how, you know, the body and the posture and many other things that, you know, begin to make the story come alive. And sometimes, you know, like I think the question we're asking ourselves is that where is the beginning and the end of it all? I mean, I'm very much aware that you cannot completely absolve yourself from thinking that stories don't affect you, because the first, you know, aspect of what the story does to you is your imagination and all those, you know, other you know, faculties of how you imagine the story. So the effect is already there in a way. And the question is whether that effect of you and your relationship with story is either empowering or disempowering, or it is also something that you wish to carry with yourself or not. So one of the things that I do as a director when I direct is to quite consciously make the actor aware of the steps they take to get into character, so that it is easier to repeat the steps you take, you know. So for example, how is your walk different from the walk of your character? How is your voice different from the voice of the character? How is your posture? And when you consciously make those choices as you go in, and often in the rehearsal process, you walk as yourself and then walk as the character, so that you are listening to the shifts that are happening in your body, so that that familiarity with, you know, the world that you are inviting, into your body is quite clear between, yourself and, that. And it's not to say that you cannot fall into, the spaces of being the character at some point, but you would know. You'll immediately recognize that this is not me, this is this kind of character because of the kind of things, the tools that you've applied. But also ritual, like, you mentioned a little bit there, Barnaby, is that ritual helps you, to kind of contain things. It becomes, a container of things. It becomes a way in which, with this, when I do this, this is what switches in my body. This is what shifts in my body. It becomes a tool, that you can use, in between shifting, between the modes of life that we are, because the stories we see, the stories, like right now, the first thing that Barnaby was explaining to us is the stories that he has heard and how they have led to this conversation. And it means that those stories are living with him as part of, and they've affected some of the decisions that he has made, part of which has gathered us here today. So we have been invited into that world of stories. So the things that, are interesting for me is that the moment we start thinking about role, we're thinking about depth, we're thinking about understanding, these are some of the words that, and for me, it's quite interesting because I think that when you perform stories, or whether you watch, or when you watch stories, you are restoring yourself. And you are storing yourself. In the sense that if you watch it, if you are part of it, it's going to affect you either emotionally, psychologically, however it affects you. It's going to shift your emotions. It's just shifted the emotions of the actor. Together in that world, you are affecting each other and you're giving each other kind of energies that are going to stay with you forever. The actor has taken the honors to be paid, to be somebody else. And sometimes you are somebody else forever, whether by means of other people recognizing you as that person, whether you like it or not. In the case of Sipho, Tony has got the same thing. I know every time when we go to, especially Cape Town, other, and there's places where he gets recognized by certain kind of people because of the stories that he has done on Mzansi Magic. And then, today somebody was asking me, is that Big Nunu on set? And I said, no, that's Tony. Big Nunu is somewhere on Netflix. Is the guy who acted Big Nunu? I say, yes, that's him. Because I always try to make that difference for them, because they're going to approach you as the character as opposed to approach you as a human being. So it's quite interesting for me that psychoanalysis is struggling, or is interrogating the same issues that we are interrogating about, role and derolling, about embodying other people's, or being storied by other people's experiences, and how those stories stay with us, or how we choose to try and reject those stories. Even when we try to, sometimes they still stay with us, but it's about how we treat them and we make space for them, within our bodies. It's not about building an altar for them, but it's about recognizing and acknowledging that they are part of our world in a certain way, but they are not there to become us. I'll stop there.
Well, you've given us so many things to think about. Where would anyone like to pick up any of those many threads?
Well, again, I would like to say the similarity between what it requires of a director, the skill set of a director, and what you've just spoken about definitely requires a sense of deep self-awareness of humanity and yourself and the people that you are directing. And I think that is so similar to psychoanalysis. So I would just like to link what I said to start with and what you ended up saying. I really do feel like there is a deep link there. If anyone else.
Thank you.
I think I had such a clear idea of what my response to the original question would be like when Barnaby posed it. And then Samantha started speaking, and my mind went crazy, and then Tony, and then Phala, and then, you know, sort of not only connecting the dots, I think, within the sphere in which we all work, but at the same time also realizing things about my own creative process, and also my life leading up to this point where this is my craft and my career. I sort of had a very opposite development to what Samantha said, where you said where you didn't have the tertiary experience. And from what you're saying, it sort of feels almost as if a lot of it is very intuitive for you, whereas I sometimes feel the exact opposite, because I wish it could be more intuitive, because, you know, as a young kid being trained in classical music, and my grandmother and my mother were both classical music teachers. And so the very rigorous strictness that came with that, with both singing and with piano and everything that came with that. And then studying drama, where I, for a long time, felt sort of like a failure because I couldn't get into character. When I was studying drama, everything was sort of very, very method acting-esque. And if it wasn't method acting, it was all derivatives of it. So Adler and Meisner and all those styles that want you to get into your head, and they want to get a lot of the times into past trauma. And I don't know if I just psychologically put up barriers or boundaries to that. I just didn't want to and could not. And so never really felt, I mean, I felt my own characterization was flat, and you know, very frequently got the same feedback from lecturers or from teachers about that. And I actually then discovered, sort of through a little action on set, working with the director, where the direction was for me to get angry and to get angrier and angrier and let my anger and my rage build throughout a scene. And I just could not access it and could not fully embody that emotion. And the director sort of gave me a broomstick and said, well, start sweeping the floor as if the floor is your enemy, and let your breath flow through each of those, you know, sweeping motions, and let it build and build and build. And I was able to access this rage on stage. And later working, and I discovered an acting technique that was put together by a neuroscientist rather than an artist or an actor, it's called the ALBA technique. And it's about using posture, facial expressions, and breathing patterns to sort of trick your body into believing that it's feeling an emotion when it's not. And for the first time, I was suddenly able to access emotion and portray it truthfully. Something that had never been a reality for me. I'd studied drama, I'd done it all my life, and I could never really get to that point. And for a long time, thought I was a failure because of that. But with that physical, bodily approach rather than an emotional or a mental approach, that really links to what was said earlier about ritual and allowing yourself to ease into it, but then also allowing yourself to get out of it. And a friend of mine at a production I was at the State Theatre last year said to me at one point, don't go out through the foyer after the show. Go back to your dressing room, get dressed, and leave out the stage door. And I sort of thought, that's a silly thing, but it's sort of about like you enter into the space where the character inhabits in this way, and exit it the same way. You enter as Klaus, not as any of the characters that you play in this show. Get dressed back into the same outfit afterwards and exit the same way. And it's such a silly thing when you think about it. It's such a stupid thing, actually, but makes a world of difference, especially in the last show that I did, where I felt like I needed to let go, and I really had to. It was imperative that I don't take any of that along with me. But the ritual and knowing the steps, the physicality of it, the walk, the facial expressions, the accent, I think all of those things, and I've said this to my students so many times as well over the past years, is stop thinking about, when you're starting to build a character, stop thinking about the emotional journey and the whatever. Start building it from the building blocks. And I see so many actors that forget about the basic building blocks, like the first year, the grade 8 things that you get from the textbook in drama class the very first time is, what does your character lead with? What do they walk with? What is their posture like? What is their voice and their body like? And when you have those physical building blocks that are so easy to build, I feel like they're also so easy to break down again and not get stuck in someone that is not you and who you are. I don't know if that adds on to whatever's been said.
I think it adds a lot. I'm accumulating questions as much as I'm learning very fast, but we'll get to my questions because Sipho, you have been spoken about several times.
And
He's
I've
so
been listening.
patient and
No,
lovely.
when you get kids, that's the only thing you learn, right? Patience. Sure. I've been trying to like absorb quite a lot of what has been said, and I think I'll kind of like just briefly touch on each one of those things because there is quite a lot to be said. Great observation, number one, Samantha, in terms of the role of well, I guess one of the roles of a psychoanalyst, right? In the sense that I also do see the director thing in it, right? And that's quite crazy because I mean, when I did study acting too, I went to famous or infamous school, the National School of the Arts, where we obviously had when I did study drama, there was you could see the role of the director, but I also do feel like there's different types of directors in that, right?
Yes.
And I'll make an example, right? Especially like even when it comes to stage. There was one Mr. Stevenson. He was one of my teachers, acting coaches, and him and his wife had two very different directing styles,
Style.
right? Whereas his wife was more a guiding person and I let you do what you need to do in terms of characterization, whereas Mr. Stevenson was more of a technical person and telling you what to do. So which then, in terms of characterization, it's almost as if you're taking on what he wants you to do, right? And then I'll also just go back to an earlier comment around the characterization process. And for me, it's been like very difficult in the sense that I've done both screen and I've done stage. Whereas like, with the screen stuff, it's almost as if when you come to that audition, they don't have much time for that characterization process, right? So it's already when they look at you, it's like, we want this person to have this kind of build. We want this person to sound like this. We want this person to have, you know what I mean? So that it makes it easier for them when you start engaging in the process of shooting, because now when you shoot, you actually become your own director, whereas the directors, are more the technical guidance people in terms of this is the line that you need to hit at the spot at, you know what I mean? So it kind of like then it gets into that typecasting type of thing, because now it's like, they've seen you on generations before. The next role you're going to get is either going to be very similar to that, because either you did it so well, right? And I think I'll link this back now to the conversation we're obviously going to have around unlearning those things, and how do you like let go of that in your own life, right? Then there was something very interesting that was also like that I also kind of like started thinking about, right? In that sense, in that when we do have these different types of directors, your technical director who will tell you where to stand when it comes to on screen, your more director who listens and lets you take on the character yourself in that process for stage, and the different types of characterization methods, whether it be your method acting or whatever else that you do to get you into that role. And then the kind of director who will just kind of like guide you, which is what I think Barnaby does, right? In terms of having to listen and probe the questions that will then let you be where you want to be, right? And I just kind of like find that those are very like, if you are not aware of those things, I think as an actor yourself, you can kind of like maybe land up in a very dangerous space. Right. And just saying like what Klaus was saying now, and I also found this very interesting for myself. Every day when I used to walk off set from the SABC, and it is true that thing, and I think we think we're doing it right, but putting on those clothes that you had walking in as Klaus and leaving, that ritual itself actually does help a lot. But I don't think it actually completely takes that away, because even when you do walk around the theater to now enter in the front to entertain your friends who want to obviously congratulate you for the drink that you had, etc. I do still feel like because tomorrow you're gonna do the same thing,
Yeah.
it doesn't really fully leave you, right? If that makes sense. Yes, maybe those rituals do kind of like assist in letting you like breathe a bit and become Klaus, but I do feel like it still does. There are certain aspects that still stay with you for that character and for some time being, right? And there was and also now going and throwing it now to the audiences, right? Because sometimes it's not just about the actors themselves, it's also about how people receive you, right? The audiences. And I'll make an example, right? With there was this maybe this is just something in terms of the education of our audiences in SA, but I can't remember which actor it was, if it was Pamela Nomvete or Olile Chabalala, where they played their character so well on Generations that a fan walked up to them on the street because they were playing this villain. And a fan walked up to them in the street and they slapped them across the face, right? Because they couldn't believe like
Hey,
what you did last night on Generations and you are out here, right? So obviously that has one thing to do with the education of our audiences in terms of them understanding that this is someone who's just acting. But at the
It was
same time,
Pamela.
was Pamela, right? Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, also it also shows, I mean, that could also just be a thing of someone really believing so much that, you know, you are no longer Sipho. Now you are Ajax, right, in the streets. And as you walk off that set, you've taken on so many things that even how you walk and how you present yourself and how you speak, you consciously, right? Without even noticing that you are actually now whatever the character is that you're playing now in the streets. And I'll leave it there for now because I think there's quite a lot that we can still, you know, elaborate on. But and I think maybe this is the one thing that really fascinates me about this conversation. So thank you very much, Barnaby, for inviting me.
Sure. Can I just say something?
there are so many threads here, and I don't think I should be the director in the sense that I shouldn't be the one to suggest which should be picked up. So please just riff on each other. There's so much that's interesting. Samantha, I think I interrupted you.
No, first of all, I just love everything you just said. People, it's like so different. Screen is so different to just stage. And screen, I think when you generally walk into a room in a casting situation, uh, because there isn't a rehearsal process. You're literally are meant to be cast. People read your energy straight away and determine whether you are going to be right for the role and whether it is in you. Those particular aspects are within you. You know what I mean? And so when you and absolutely you are your own director, and your director on screen becomes the person who just tells you hit that mark, face that camera, etc., etc., and it's up to you. And within stage, we really have the process of, like, sometimes if we're really lucky, between a 4 and a 6 weeks rehearsal process of really delving into and working with a director who might have seen something in you that can be developed into something else. And so you're absolutely right also in the idea that you can meet terrible directors and then directors who absolutely bring out the absolute best in you. And this is where I also want to tie it into something that's maybe more psychological. And that is, and this might sound a little bit woo-woo, but like, I'm not sure if any of you have ever studied the Enneagram or looked at personality typings, but for me, the Enneagram talks about the fact that, and Klaus, this might relate to you as well, and Tony and Phala as well, is the idea that some of us approach life in a very mental and intellectual way. Others are much more emotional. Others are instinctive, and it's a very bodily sort of way of approaching life. And so when you, Klaus, said to me, things are instinctive, and for you, it is intellectual. And I feel like that is part of, I don't know why, I just feel like that's why you were speaking about the difference in process. We would have a different process in approaching something. You either just automatically get it because you know it, it's instinctive, and you just go. Other times you need to actually break it down intellectually and like, why does this make sense? And what am I doing? And why, and why, and why? And then, you know, emotionally, there is that whole other aspect of like, just really going deeply into the emotional layers of stuff. And I think that's what I was trying to say is like, I met a director who fully understood how to approach different people according to how he saw them. So he would approach me in a particular instinctive way, but he would speak to that person in an intellectual way and that person in an emotive way. And he just knew how to get it out of us. And I think that is what I'm trying to say is almost like what I would imagine a great therapist would be able to do is be able to prompt and get out of you and lead you to a place where, and then to talk about rolling, if that's the theme of what we're talking about now, is like getting into character. And Phala and Tony, you were talking about this as well, is you know, like the physical embodiment of and the walking and particular physical characteristics. And then we have the characters and the wigs perhaps that help you to do that. And there is also that entire, for us, especially on stage, is the dressing room process. You know, when you're in your own space and then you go through the tunnel and you know, like we all know we've done that before, where it is your own space and you have to go from you and suddenly you're putting on makeup or you're putting on whatever it is that you're doing, going through whatever the process is to get to the point before you can step on stage. And the same thing happens at the end of a performance, is taking all of that off. But like you were saying, Sipho, is like, that's not enough. It's not enough. It almost like it helps you to sort of get out of that moment. But when you are doing 8 shows a week, you can de-roll to a point and then you got to return to it the very next day. And for screen actors, same thing is, and that's why method acting is such a thing. And you hear about method actors actually going to that place and losing themselves completely.
Yes.
Because you are living in that character and you can't let it go. So I would love to go into that space of like, let's talk about that. Like what the hell that's like for an actor.
I have a question, Samantha. Absolutely, and I think I've seen this in so many in music as well, with opera singers specifically, who for some it's all about the technique and the emotion comes sort of as this secondary add-on, and for others it's the complete opposite. And seeing the musical directors or the conductors as well, who can identify the different types and the different styles. And I understand now completely what you meant with finding a director that knows how humans work, that understands human nature. It's just for my own curiosity, and maybe I think you and Sipho would and I think Tony as well. I'm sort of very theatre trained, and I've worked mostly in theatre my whole career. And I recently actually started out with screen. And one thing that caught me, and I mean, starting out with a new medium in my 30s, is the stark difference when something doesn't happen chronologically. And that I found is so, convenient for stage actors, that 90% of your characterization and the character's arc is something that happens chronologically, and you can move up with it. And most of the time, there is a resolution or your character dies. But in screen, it sort of felt very jarring for me that, I had the resolution on day one, and then the introduction in day 4, and it felt. And Sipho, you mentioned that's still not enough, and I agree with you. But when you're doing it in a screen setting, when you're doing multicam, or you're doing jumping around chronologically between time frames, how do you then, when you don't have the natural denouement in your actual performance, how do you approach it there?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting that you mentioned that, right? So, and I guess it goes back to the comment that I made earlier around you direct yourself, right? So, I mean, it's quite silly that your first scene is you crying of your mother dying, and you haven't built that relationship with her before. So it's like, what the hell am I doing, right? I mean, which is why, like, I find obviously there is a process that is involved in terms of you having to understand your role thoroughly. Obviously, you still develop it, right? Especially if it's like your first gig and you only like 1 week into shooting. But what I'm trying to say is understanding your role and the purpose of your role in what's your journey going to be. If it's in a soap, what's your journey going to be for the next 6 months? You have to know that journey, because then otherwise it's going to throw things off a bit, right? In terms of your characterization and where you're trying to be, right? But I fully agree with you. It is it's a bit jarring for an actor who's used to doing stuff chronologically, because you build those emotions and you build the story to where it needs to go exactly, right? As opposed to now you starting with the end and having to do it that way. But look, the second part of it, in terms of having to take off those shells, if I suppose it's easier to do it if the gig on screen was shorter. So if you were only there for like 6 months, then maybe you haven't built those habits yet, right? But obviously, if you've been there for 5 years, you become this person now. Now it's no longer like trying to do rehearsals, because you know this character so well that they give you the script, you walk on set, you just do it, right? And there's nothing that's going to throw you off from a characterization point of view, because you've already built so many layers of this onion that it's quite solid now, right? So I
And at
guess
some point they start to write for you, because
they start to write. Yeah, listen, it's so crazy. It's so crazy to a point where you start to improvise, right? I remember on like when I was still in Generations, it got to a point where we were given a script, but some depending on who the director was, they would allow us the room for you to say what you want to say in that moment, right? Because I mean, you've been doing this character for 3 years, that there wouldn't be anything that's kind of like off, right? Obviously within context of the scene itself, right? And which is where maybe the danger is now, because now it's now you, in a way. It's like you are the character. Yeah, I don't know if I've spoken to it.
100%.
You're on mute.
The question, yeah, the question for me is like something that I'm just thinking about when you're talking about that you are now you. The question that I have was, when were you never you?
I mean, you, the character. No.
No, I mean, and I'm asking that question deliberately, because in all this, the aspects of the thing that I feel sometimes, we fail to accept, is that your character and yourself are carried by the same body,
Totally.
by the same limbs, by the same mind,
Yes.
by the same emotions. So the source is the same. And sometimes maybe we expect too much for the source to be different. But for me, this is where the aspect of it is. Is it in the return, in the repetition, that, you find the comfort or the ease, and therefore forget, that
Yes.
this is still a role, and what are the kind of things that needs to remind you, that this is still a role, no matter how, the mastery of it, that the tools are easier, fine. But, if the moment, I think for me, that's where the thing sits. The moment you begin to forget, it means then you are allowing yourself to go to an area which becomes now quite blurry.
Very
What was
dangerous.
the
And that
word
is
you
what
just used?
I'm
I'm
saying,
sorry,
that
I
the
missed.
moment
Yeah.
I'm saying the moment that you allow yourself, to forget that there's a role that then you are getting into a moment where it becomes blurry, where now things now start to, become quite loose. And then in that, aspect of them being loose is where you can easily lose yourself. Because
Yes.
in the thing, you go to work, but you no longer take work as work. You take work as you understand? So for me, it's like something there has, shifted a little bit, that you need, for you can't let go of the very tools that, help you. If the moment you now start letting go of the tools, that's where the issue is. For like Tony has done, the role of, Kafka's ape for a long time, for about 15 years. And one of the things that he knows is the habits that, this is the ape. And sometimes, you'll be like, there I was channeling the ape, you saw, because he knows where the tools of the ape are, and then he will, easily access them. But he knows that I am accessing this tools. It's a different when he is caught himself in a situation where he does not longer know the tools that he's pulling from, and therefore does not even see that he's channeling the ape at different kind of things. It's a different kind of a conversation to have with somebody who understands that this is what I am doing. This is the kind of tools that I am drawing on, because I need this, or I need to facilitate something. So for me, it's always that kind of a role. It's like when a psychoanalyst is in the room and begins to talk to somebody, and then the very next client, there's a blaring kind of a story of thinking that the person in front of you now is the continuation of the person who came to you 2 hours before. Then in that kind of a thing, where somebody doesn't consciously begin to know and make that distinction, I think that's where the thing is that there's a moment of there's a need of that greater awareness, that deeper awareness, that deliberate decision, to understand, to say this is what this is and this is what this is. And that is why for me is that it doesn't sit in the question to ask, when you are inside the room, inside the studio, it's not what is your role, what does it lead with, is that when you do it, what are the steps that you have taken for yourself? Here it is. It's in the doing. It's in thinking through the doing, so that you can think back, through that doing, as opposed to, because I've seen when you ask people questions, it's easy to answer. When you ask people to do and to feel the difference, it's a different kind of a world. We can easily answer questions. Sometimes even, I mean, the funny thing is, like, when you're inside a production, and I mean, I've seen this, happen a lot in theater. The character is written 40 something years. The other one is written in the 20s. And then you ask the actors who are acting that, it's a man and a woman. The woman is in the 40s, the guy's in the 20s. And then you ask the person, say, just write down the age that you think Sipho is playing this person at. All right. It's written 20 something. And then you say, Samantha, tell me, if you're interacting with, Sipho's character, what is the age? And you find that, Sipho is thinking that, oh, Samantha's character is 49. And Samantha is thinking that her own character is 40. And then, Sipho is thinking that I'm playing a 21-year-old, but Samantha is receiving that character at 29 years old. And then you already know that there's a discrepancy in the story in itself, in the way in which these people have built a relationship, and those kind of things become key in how, the continuation happens and how things, for me, perhaps I'm a person who tries to pay too much attention to detail, because that detail is the very thing that you build rituals around, you build the ins and outs around, and it's not just about the overarching things, and I mean that I always say there's directors of story and directors of, actors
Yes.
in theater, where this one is more about I'm pushing the story, this is what needs to happen in the story. And then, but understand these characters, because I think it's hard to find directors who do both. The attempt is always to do both. It's always to understand the story as you understand the actors, as you understand the characters. Because there's also a difference between understanding the character and understanding the actor who plays the character.
Yeah.
You may understand the character so well, but are you able to help the actor, get to that world of the character?
Yes.
And what are the things that you do yourself as a director to give the tools, so that now even the actor understands the tools that they've used? Because the other thing is, if you don't understand how you go in, I always say, if you don't know how you got in, you won't know how to get out.
Absolutely.
Garbage in, garbage out. It's as simple as that. So the moment you know how to go in, you know how to go out.
Yeah.
If you know these are the things that I do to get in, you'll know these are the things that I need to do to get out. And you need to prepare those as a package, So to get into a role, we say to get into. So get in itself is a process of going. Into is another process of going somewhere, in that kind of a role. Then what is this role that I am getting into? What makes it? What breaks it? Because for me, it's like all the time, where there's a presence, there's an absence. If this is present, there's something that, if there's a presence of anger, then it means that there's an absence of happiness, there's an absence of something else. So how do you always think about these things that, if I'm pushing this person to go that way, the opposite of where they're going is this. And therefore, how do we make sure that, they remember where to go? So all the time for me is like the world operates in those kind of opposites, and and even for myself, if I feel like, I'm not feeling, happy, the question is like, what has brought sadness to me? What has shifted here? Or I didn't like when this person said this, that's why I have a shift in it. So then it makes me aware of some of the things that, I do. Not all the time are we in control of those kind of things, unfortunately. Sometimes it's an afterthought. It's you go through the emotions first, and then later on you kind of like look back and then say, oh, damn it, I shouldn't have said this. I couldn't, then I should have been more careful about this. It's human, it's humanity. And for me, the thing that is important to think about as we are thinking about this is that because the stories are going to story us, whether we like it or not. That's why I have a little bit of a problem with the word, D role, which is almost like, it's like you are getting away from role or something like that. I'm trying to look for a word that will say living with some elements of this role or residues of this role, as opposed to thinking that I can completely erase, the thing out of me, because I don't think that even your objective when you are getting into a role is to, tomorrow to have forgotten all of it, to have completely be, devoid of it, to be able to, so I don't think that is the objective. The objective is for it to not affect you negatively. The objective is for you to not, live with it as a thing that is a little cancer in your life that comes popping through and sometimes making you make choices that you otherwise you could have not made. So I think for me is that we never totally de-roll, but we are able to live with some of the effects of how these roles have storied us, how they've affected us, but and not affect in in a negative way. That how sometimes they have enriched us, sometimes all those kind of things. I think are things and elements that we draw. You can be a story richer or a little wiser as a psychoanalyst, as an actor, as a theater maker, as a story, by learning from somebody else's story. And it doesn't mean that you are carrying that story negatively, and sometimes having had the experience with the other person helps you be able to help the other person better, because there has been something that you've learned from that aspect. It has grown you somehow, and you also know, even when it's a bad story, sometimes it tells you the things not to do. So for me, I'm like, yes, we can be. The only time that I think we speak of, hey, you need to de-roll, is when there's a negative, aspect to it. I remember a friend of mine was playing this positive, guy, in a play, and the girlfriend said to us, like, I think I like you better when you are this character. Because when you are yourself, you're a little bit rude. So every time when they were having a conversation, he would say, hey, can you channel Richard? Channel Richard, channel Richard, channel Richard. And then this one will understand channel Richard means I must be more positive. I must be, yeah. He says Richard listens more, you don't. So he he had to borrow from the character.
So I'd love to add something to that. I would love to add to the fact that, I mean, we speak about ritual and we speak about like routines, because that's such a valuable part of what it is that we do, especially on stage, is these routines and tools and rituals that we go through, and they help us. I think it's almost easier when the character is completely different from oneself, to be able to inhabit that and for not to affect you. The closer the character is to yourself, and like you say, we're not using anyone else's vessels, we're using our own bodies, but it's much harder when it's closer to home. And the idea of de-rolling for me only really exists when there is something that traumatically happens to you on stage that you have to go through every night. Because here's what I have learned and realized is that, some people think that actors, I mean, you've heard this, you're an actor. Oh my God, you can cry on cue, or oh, you can just manipulate an emotion, or you can just do this, or you can do that, and that's not true. What we do is we try to channel truth. It has to come from ourselves, and it comes from truth. And so the body does not understand the difference. Your mind knows that you are playing a character who is going through maybe a traumatic experience, but your body and the emotions and the energy that is created within your body does not know any different. So every night you might be going through a traumatic experience. If you are acting somebody who's going through a rape or abuse every single night, that's when I say there is a need to absolutely understand how to de-roll and to understand how to separate, because it is still you using your body and your vessel, and you are still going through that every night. And so, yes, you're playing a character, but it is the experience of what you are experiencing every night. Your body does not understand. And let me tell you, I've had this experience where I did not understand. So 8 shows a week. 6 months later of playing the same role and not understanding why I was in deep depression. So when we're talking de-rolling, it's not about, oh, well, I'm trying to get rid of a separate entity or a character. I don't know what's me and what's the role. It's more about the body not understanding the difference between what you've been experiencing it's not me experiencing, it's the character because I'm channeling it through myself. Does that make sense? And
I
I've
mean,
only learned.
it makes a
I've
lot
only
of sense.
that.
It makes a lot of sense, and that is why I'm like, that's why the idea of derolling for me becomes, you know, a difficult. It's not the process of derolling, but it's the naming
No.
of derolling, which is like, I mean, DE is almost like away from and stuff like that. But the mere fact of you know, acknowledging and knowing that it is the same body that channels the same, you know, or different kind of an
Time.
energy and stuff. That is the
Even though you
beginning
tell
of
yourself
understanding.
mentally, your body cannot
Yes.
understand it. You need
Yeah.
to. There is
So then
something.
you need to have ways and understanding that this thing is, you know, requires me to go to depths that I can never ever, you know, go into, or that, you know, becomes a repetitive kind of a thing that then
Every night. So you go through a
builds
trauma,
something
and then
else,
you got
builds a
to
layer.
you got to go
Right.
back again the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and you're never getting rid of it until at the end of a run, you understand. You're not understanding why I have lost myself. And so it's not
Yeah.
about, oh, well, I don't know the difference between me and that. It's the fact that, like you've said, you've channeled this experience through yourself.
And
See,
that's why
that you're nodding your head.
that is why I'm saying, you know, for me now, as I am
Can I interrupt whoever is speaking?
yes,
Were we all closed down, or was it just my link
no, it
that
was
was
just
closed
you.
down?
It was just you.
So you all heard what Samantha said, and I missed 5 minutes of it.
Yeah.
Could you repeat it word for word for me, Samantha?
Never. Could
No.
You'll have to
Well,
rewatch it.
we're all talking about repetition in one way or another. Okay, please
Yeah.
continue where you were. I would like to say
So
I have a couple of things to say, which I
okay.
after Phala, after you finished, or whoever is finished, one of which I think will throw a wrench in the works. And then a little later, I want to say something about psychoanalysis because I think it may provoke you to help psychoanalysts do exactly what they need to be doing better than they now do it. Please, whoever was speaking, continue. And I
Yes.
apologize for my internet interruption.
Yes. I was just saying that because, you know, the first acknowledgement of getting into your role is the same, and that is why I was deliberately mentioning that is the same vessel, is the same tool, you know, that is available for that trauma as it is available for the happiness, as it is available for everything else. Is that the moment you recognize that this tool is being, you know, storied differently, that it is being put into a repetitive aspect where it might, even when you know with your mind that your body might not know what is happening to it, that already you need to put tools in place for that, because then you know. And especially that is why when you're dealing with anything that has to do with trauma, that has to do with, you know, repeated pain, and that is becomes layering and layering and layering, there's no way I think you need to wait for the end of a run. You know, there has to be in place, you know, especially because you perform at night, there has to be in a place, you know, put in place a kind of a process that helps you not even go so deep that you are going to get into, you know, a levels of depression. And that's why I'm like, if people don't pay attention to those kind of things in the first place, when you are beginning to direct, when you are beginning to build that story, then it becomes a problem from the onset because you are not doing anything about it. One of the worst things, I mean, as you're giving, you know, an example of rape, one of the worst things about rape is not just the moment of being raped, it's the fact that you are living and you are negotiating sex from that experience for the rest of your life.
Yes, and just the
So
energy
anything,
coming at you, even.
exactly, and anything that is going to, you know, feed from that aspect, you know, I mean, and sometimes it can even happen in situations of intimacy where your boyfriend or the person that you've allowed, you know, to have access to your body, that's almost the same thing that the person who raped you did.
I almost feel
And it
like,
could be breath, it could
yeah,
be
it could
a
be
touch, it could be
anything.
that. So there are so many levels of also just
Yeah,
understanding that, you know,
yeah,
psychologically, emotionally, you know, this a level of being affected by things that are not just
yeah.
affecting you physically. And for me, that is why I mean, there's a need to think about the deeper care that and to understand the power of the story, and to understand that every time, no matter how we think we're standing outside of stories, that we're standing inside of them, and that they are affecting us in many layers and in many ways.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the beginning of really thinking about how to be aware, how to understand the depths that we were talking about, how to use rituals that can help you. And that
Yeah.
thing, I mean, one of the things that you started mentioning at the beginning was understanding. And I underline that to say, what is it that we are understanding? What are we standing under? When we are thinking about this element of stories, or what is standing over us, or so for me it was something like to think about it, not just on a superficial level, and thinking that this aspect of the removal from, which is the rolling or the reversal or the undoing, because that's what the prefix de is about, away from or down from, that are we really thinking that we are down from, or have we developed a new kind of a layer that we need to live with differently, or engage with it in a different kind of a form, because it has now become part of us in a way. And have we even attempted to stop it from becoming a significant thing that affects us in the first place? So those are the kind of things that I wanted us, maybe to touch on, because I think this thing goes a little bit deeper,
Deeper.
than just,
Yeah, it does. And I mean, just to say something, and then I'll shut up because I've spoken a lot. But I do feel like, there is such a thing as sports psychology. And I feel like, Barnaby, that we might need performance psychology, because people do not understand actually what and how much it would help, because we in the entertainment industry, we have no boundaries. We are meant to go into a space and immediately feel intimate with people. Immediately go into a space where you might be playing lovers. You've just met the person that day and you're supposed to perform a scene, or whatever it is. There are no boundaries. And so it almost leads into your life that you have no boundaries, and boundaries are things that hold you safe. Sipho, I see you nodding your head. Please talk.
There's a lot that you've said, hey,
Uh,
that I
No.
kind of like relate to, um, especially when it comes to the detachment of yourself from that character. I'm not going to use the word de-roll, right? Because you in a
Yeah.
way have to detach, right?
Yeah. Detach.
And,
100%.
and it's so crazy because I remember earlier on in when I started like my professional acting career, there, there was a technique that I used to use all the time for different things, right? So if I needed to cry, I knew this is the moment that I channel, and what started happening is that it started making that moment insignificant now in my life, to a
Yes.
point where every time I started thinking about that moment, when that moment used to make me cry, it doesn't make me cry anymore, because
Yeah.
now I'm like, I've
None.
abused that moment so much that like now I have to find another moment, and and wait for something to become traumatic for me to be able to get there again, right? And it's bad because, and it's that thing of like, when do you then detach? When do you detach? And I just wanted to go back to what Paulo was saying earlier on, also just around and I'll make an example again around, and maybe I'll make differences, right, in terms of the repetition that you get from stage, because with stage obviously you would have the process of you rehearsing for like 5 weeks, and then now you do the same thing over and over and over and over, right? And whereas with the TV one, it's a bit, and maybe this is why I found it so difficult for me to detach, right?
Yes.
Because you almost like,
Developing it all the
you
time.
almost exactly
Yes.
all the time,
Yeah.
right? And so what then tends to happen, it becomes so difficult for you to actually get away from it,
Yes.
because as you leave
It's
set,
growing. It's growing. It's growing.
yeah, yeah, as you leave sets, they give you the script for tomorrow, and in the time that you would have thought that you're getting home to kind of like relax and not think about this character, but
You're
you can't,
learning.
because now you have another script, and you
Yep.
get into that pattern and that routine, where now it makes the detaching part of it so much more difficult,
Yeah.
right? And I guess then this is where you cheat yourself in a way, right? You cheat yourself in a way where because you do it in such a way that you don't even think about it, the script writers themselves, in a way, make you the character.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas before you walked into this character, now when they write, they're like,
They're
oh,
writing for you.
we haven't seen Ajax in this thing, but what they actually mean is we haven't seen Sipho do this on screen.
Yes. Yes.
You see, so and that's where the danger now becomes with the stuff that you're just churning out like it's a sausage factory. Because I mean, at the same time, it can be quite easy, but at the same time, it's quite different. It's quite dangerous because you now yourself are no longer playing the character. You are the character now, right?
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not using the wrong way of like describing it, but that's kind of like how it feels, or it started feeling to me, and which is maybe the reason why I got to a point where I was like, no, man, I can't do this anymore because I think I've given so much of myself towards this character that now I'm basically becoming this person, and it's not meant to be that, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I've seen this a very, very similar thing, and it sort of scares me, and it's one of the things that I mentioned to Barnaby when we sort of started chatting about tonight's webinar, is having existed in music and in the theater. I've seen choir conductors and I've seen vocal, piano, instrumental teachers when a kid has to play a very sad piece, one of the Chopin nocturnes or the Moonlight Sonata or whatever, and the kid is playing the right notes, but there's no feeling or no emotion, where a teacher who is, not necessarily trained would say, darling, think about a traumatic moment in your past. Think about the saddest moment and try to relive that as you play. And the thing about it is it's quite effective. It works. And suddenly you see, a 15-year-old child playing piano, and it moves everyone in the audience, which has this very unhealthy circular pattern where it reinforces that child to do the same thing the next time that they sing a sad song or sing a happy song or whatever. But and I think that's why method acting in itself is only effective when it is really done with the right supervision and training, which it actually very rarely is. Anyone can download a PDF on the Stanislavski system and teach that to a 13-year-old kid, which is so incredibly psychologically dangerous to an adolescent mind. But now, without the right emotional and psychological supervision, that child is being forced to, every time they perform it at a recital or a school assembly or a UNISA piano exam, to relive without processing. And that is, I think, where a lot of performers in the arts, it's dangerous. And they have their trauma is sort of exponentialized in that process. And I've seen that with actors and with musicians of all ages, where if the supervision, if the care, everything that Phala has said about how you treat your actors, Samantha, everything that you've said about the directors that have been able to understand, it feels like they were not just there to understand, but they were also there to supervise and to create a framework or a safety net within which this must happen and can happen in a safe manner. And it's very sad to say that across all of these disciplines, that safety net, that structure, that framework isn't always there.
Yeah. I have to say one more thing, in that it's not all bad. I mean, here's another thing, and I might be, throughout this entire webinar, completely revealing of myself psychologically, Barnaby, is the fact that I have also been in shows where night after night, I've been asked to, the role requires something of me that is so different from the way that I would normally behave. And it's cathartic. Because it is almost like a sense of like, I would never do this. I would never have the courage to do this in everyday life. I would never be screaming. I would never be shouting. Maybe I would not be comfortable with conflict. And yet every night I'm asked to do this. And the sense of catharsis is like, ha, it's energy just releasing from your body. So it's good as well. It's not all bad. We're lucky. We are lucky as actors and performers to be able to express the human condition, whatever that may be. We really are so gifted. It has its trauma that we have to like work through. It has its joyous moments. It's part of creativity. I don't know what I'm ending up saying. I'm just saying it's not all bad. And Barnaby, whatever you want to say about that.
Well, I think we'll agree you're not all bad, Sammy. It's not all bad and it's not all good. And if I can now summarize a couple of things sort of from the perspective of what I imagine to be an audience listening to this podcast who are not theatrical professionals. It's not all good, it's not all bad. There are dangers in one direction and there are problems in the other direction. Now, one of the greatest 20th century philosophers, Gilles Deleuze, said there's no such, or actually Friedrich Nietzsche said this previously in the late 19th century, there's no such thing as a repetition. All right, so there is no repetition that is a pure reiteration. And actually, you've all in different ways said that yes, the role is repeated, but there's always a little bit of a difference. So one way that it's been said several times over is you may get out of the role that you've got into, but it always leaves some sort of residue in you. I think you've almost all said that in different types of vocabulary. And Phala, you said it several times, rather very brilliantly from different directions. Now, if there's always a residue, if always a leftover, that again is neither good, neither bad, but it raises two questions, I think, which I'm going to pose to you. And I'm not really expecting answers, but I'm doing it for the sake of sort of clarifying where we might be in the conversation. On the microcosmic level, let's take, for instance, what was said at the beginning of the podcast. Phala, you were telling the story about someone, Tony, I'm sorry, I forget what the role was you were playing, but someone says to Phala, is that so-and-so? What was the role? And then anyway, I think you're muted.
Big Noon, eh? That was the name of the character.
Big Noon.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone says, hey, is that guy on the street Big Noon? And you say, no, it's Tony who plays that role. Now, so in a way we're talking, and inevitably the public think of it as if there is an essential self. But the trouble is there is no essential self in a way that our self is modified by every experience we ever had. So what I wonder then is on the microcosmic individual level, when do you notice yourself getting confused between the role and whatever you might think of as your essential self? And is that confusion creative, productive, growthful? Or is it, as Sipho very plainly said, gets to feel dangerous to the point where you need to get out of it? That's on the microcosmic. On the macrocosmic level, and I'm not asking for self-disclosure here, but it makes one wonder. You've all had careers in theater. How has it changed you overall? And I'm not expecting autobiographies, but I think it's a fascinating question. How has it changed you? So that's the first thing I wanted to sort of throw a wrench in the works. And then I wanted to say something about psychoanalysis, because Sammy was right and insightful to say there is something directorial about it, maybe. But a lot of psychotherapists and psychoanalysts defend themselves against emotional engagement with the patient, and they defend themselves by treating the patient as something else something outside themselves that they're there to understand, interpret, observe, offer suggestions to, in order to help the patient rewrite their narrative in some way. And that is one type of psychotherapy, often called psychoanalysis, I think erroneously, but there's a sort of a distancing between the patient and the practitioner, and the practice becomes very cerebral. It becomes very much about intellectual understanding. One of the things that's happened to me, I've never really done anything in my life except psychoanalysis. I know about practically nothing in the world other than psychoanalysis. I'm almost like an idiot savant, actually, outside the consulting room. But the thing is that, but it has profoundly changed me being in that profession, in that calling. Now, there is another way of thinking about psychoanalysis in which the patient isn't out there, but the patient in some ways also very much in here. And one of the things that has happened to me is when I began my career, I thought about let's understand the patient. Let's understand the patient as if he or she is a case, which is what most clinicians do. One of the things that has shifted in me is I don't think so much, and I actually use my body and listening with my body much, much more than I listen with what you might think of as my intellect. And this makes me rather unusual. And I have a book coming out next month just on this topic. Feeling in your body is a different process from excising the patient from your mind. You can put the patient and the patient's narrative out of your mind. Perhaps you can, perhaps you can't. But the patient, I find, is in my body, and I find myself listening with my body. And that's a very different sort of experience because it doesn't really go away. In some ways, every patient changes me, both in the course of a day and in the course of the periods of years over my life. So I'm wondering, I think, about listening with the body and the deep unconscious connections we have on an energetic level between our bodies. And one effect of that, for me, is that I start having to discern what is my stuff in my body and what is the stuff that I'm picking up from the patient. And that is a craft, an art that actually very few psychotherapists bother to try to learn because they're so busy having a cerebral understanding of the patient's role in the patient's life and their role in the patient's life. It's very difficult. I can find myself listening to a patient whose narrative is exceedingly boring, and I find myself getting slightly erotically aroused. Conversely, I can listen to a patient, who's telling some very placid story about nothing, and I find myself getting irritated. The craft, which I don't think any one of us are good enough at, and I certainly am not, but the craft is, where does that energy come from? Am I, in fact, in my body picking up something from the patient that I'm experiencing that in a certain sense was initiated by the patient? Or am I just introducing my own stuff into the relationship and maybe even affecting negatively the patient because I happen to have had a bad day or a fight with my lover or whatever. But what's fascinating and what I have found this conversation teaching me is the ways that you do it because it is so central to your craft. And yet it manages to be something that a lot of mental health professionals are quite defended against. I don't know how that all sits with all of you. In terms of rituals, what I find is the most essential part of my sitting with a patient is to keep my breath in my abdomen. Because when my breath moves out of my abdomen, I know something of my own shit is entering into the picture. And when my breath is in my abdomen, and there are other things I do, like drinking a glass of water, stretching between sessions, I'm fortunate enough to have a swimming pool and a hot tub almost every day. At the end of the day, I'm in one or the other. But you've taught us so much as mental health professionals in this last hour, so that I really want to thank you. But I'd also like to hear if any of you have immediate reactions to what I've just disclosed about different ways that therapists act and different ways in which I've come to be as a psychoanalyst, which is actually quite maverick and quite distinctive from most people in my profession.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the kind of thing that's pinging at the front of my mind is around how in many ways a lot of the repetition that we try to emulate sort of becomes challenged when we move through processes that are different, that require things that are different. For me, I've spent 15 years performing Kafka's Ape. That character is half animal, half ape, half human, half ape, more ape than human. And so the very early years were about just physically finding a language that would be possible to live in my body in credible and engaging ways for the audience. And then when that happened, the latter part of performing the show has been, the middle part became about how do I maintain that kind of intensity? It's like a football player at their peak. And then now in the latter parts, or what I think are the latter parts of that, it's been about how to accept that the intensity can't be maintained. And so there's been a different cadence and a different requirement of the connection to the character through the process of repetition that's been required at different parts of that character's life. In the television work that I do, often I'm very frustrated by the fact that often the parts that I have are small cameos that one feels are inconsequential, that don't get as much treatment and care from the system as a whole in the way that the story is crafted. And so the interesting thing for me becomes, how do I find the thing that I can understand and readily access to make this character, this performance, this role, the more interesting thing? And so I don't have the luxury of a long lead in and a long time spending to unpack what it means. What I have is like a moment that requires a particular burst of energy. And so I highlight these very two different things because both things require me to draw from different places and different things, as and when that moment of performance is required. And more I'm learning that the thing that I try to do in any process that I engage is to build a kind of scaffolding that allows me to feel safe, honest, and tuned in enough to produce the moment of listening and responding with honesty. So it's kind of building a playpen where there are a range of things that are in there that are at my disposal. And I don't know in that moment, when that moment comes, what it is that I'll pick up. But I know that it's safe because I understand all of the toys that I've put in the playpen, if that makes sense. And so in a process that takes 15 years, I've got 15 years to play and refine and add toys to that playpen. It's actually quite a cluttered playpen. You know, some of the process between Phala and I over the years with the same show, in order to keep it fresh and relevant and meaningful for me, has been about taking away some toys from the playpen. Understanding that some toys that worked uh, uh, 15 years ago when we started worked because you were thinner and you were more agile and you were fitter. They no longer work because you went to the gym and you exercised your upper body too much and now you're stiff. You can no longer be a nimble chimpanzee. You're now more like a gorilla who's harder on the front upper end and hard, you know. So those are the things that you start to, because you understand the work and you understand all of the mechanisms that you put in place, you understand what you've put in your playpen in order to be able to access that moment of truth and listening and responding in the most honest and organic way that's still impactful for the people that are receiving. In the same way, when you are going onto a set, you don't know anyone, there's a rapport, this thing has been shooting for 15 days. You're supposed to come and tell a very contained story or contribute to the main character story in very particular ways, but you must still be engaging and interesting in the way that you do it. You understand that in my playpen, in the things that I know and understand, the things that I've read about, the things that I've heard in music, the things that I've observed in people, there is this that I understand about this character, and there might be a viable proposition in the moment that the response and the listening is required. And that's what it is that I draw from to give over in that moment. And all of this we do as we track ourselves and move towards the moment of delivery. And sometimes those are things that stay and linger for a long time, and sometimes those are things that you're able to leave very quickly. But I think there's something interesting in the process, and again, returning to accessing this conversation by thinking about repetition, because a lot of also what I understand around psychoanalysis is rooted in understanding why it is that we do and repeat certain things, whether those things are positive or negative things for us, and how it is that we can put systems in place, put scaffolding in place in order to better nurture and take care of ourselves in how we go about our daily lives. And there's something interesting there that I'm grappling with.
There's a huge amount interest. There's a huge amount interesting there. And that was beautifully stated. Thank you, Tony. The interesting thing about your analogy of the pen is what defines the pen and what secures it. And that actually seems to me one way of thinking about a vital aspect of what we've been discussing tonight. The deities that control internet and webinar productions only give us 5 more minutes. What I'd like to invite, starting with Phala, because I just interrupted you, for which I apologize, but I'd like each of you could say for a minute what you would most like psychotherapists and psychoanalysts to learn, and or what you feel you have found most interesting about the discussion, taking just a minute and not really more than a minute each to do so. Could Phala, we start? Tony has just done a beautifully stated job. Phala, could we start with you, and then we'll end with Sammy since we began with her.
Yes, I mean, there are a few things that I'll say just quickly, because the question was, how has, your experiences changed you? One of the things that, it has done for me is to make me, understand, to approach things or material or myself or, those I work with, not in opposition, but with an understanding that things reposition us. That's how my approach has shifted over time. And also, one of the things that I've done is to make deliberate choices around even the words that I use. I don't block plays. There's a thing called blocking in theater, in television. I don't block, I map, because I think maps are better, than blocking, because I think that word is so negative that even for the actors, they get their mind blocked. And I just feel like it's a negative word to use within, a moment of finding together. So how can we find pathways when we are blocking, really? So for me, one thing is to make sure that there's always pathways in and out of things, and that there's a common understanding, that is there about, the awareness of what shifts and the containment when things shift. What are the things we put in place for containment? So therefore, and also how do we act on this awareness? So those are the things that I think for me has changed me in my practice. And
Thank
therefore,
you.
I think
Thank you.
the same way for psychoanalysts, I think.
Thank you. Klaus, the last
This has
words.
been sort of eye-opening. I think it's been wonderful to hear about different performers, different processes. It's not something that we get enough chance to, I think, discuss and analyze. And the two things that I'm taking away from this conversation, I mean literally taking away in terms of stealing it, is the analogy of the playpen, which struck a chord with me. And also what Phala just said about mapping, creating a roadmap without blocking and without restricting. I think that really struck a chord with me. But I think also realizing that those moments where you have felt those boundaries blur, the moments that you have felt unsafe, or where you have felt yourself maybe slip a little bit, that it's okay. And that other performers go through that as well, other performers who you've watched and who you respect. I think it's necessary to know that and to hear that. And I'm sure that some of the other psychoanalysts who are in the audience who listen to you, Barnaby, feel the same way in that type of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sipho?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two things for me, right? I mean, you first asked the question around how has theater changed you, right? So I'd start with that one, and I'll go into the psychoanalyst question. So I think, if anything, I'm an introvert, and it's a weird one to understand, because in as much as I'm someone who likes to perform, I'm not someone who likes being in large spaces, right? Which is why, which is why I guess I'm always the person who prefers to be alone, right? I can entertain people around me that I know, but the moment it's public, it becomes quite tricky, and I become quite an awkward person, which then brings me to like the theater thing in terms of, and I think that really did help me in that, in understanding people, and being, having the ability to understand social cues. So I think even now in my latter, like, part of life, or our career in entertainment, I think in the boardrooms that I sit in, and in all the spaces where I'm at, I think that's what the theater has done for me. It's given me that, it's like a shield, if so to speak, right? This shield that at least guards those insecurities for me, so that I'm able. It's almost as, I don't want to say it feels like I'm acting when I'm out in public or whatever, but at least it allows me to be able to interact, so that I don't feel so insecure. But even though I am insecure in that moment, if that makes sense, right? Which is a bit of a mind F, right? In this, and maybe this is the question for you. I went and I Googled it right now in terms of what the true definition of an introvert is. Don't know how accurate it is, but at least this is what it spits out. It says a person who recharges their energy through solitude or low stimulation environments rather than social interaction, right? So now my question to you would be then, isn't it a bit of a mind F that introverts are actors,
No,
given that definition? I just
no,
want to know, like,
I think most are,
no, no.
I
without a
think that's
doubt.
a great, I
you know,
think that's a great
and,
note to end on. Thank you, Sipho.
and there's something really, like, just in terms of, like, because, like, if you think of some of the teachings in terms of tapping into experiences and your traumas, and why would an introvert want to share those things if they are an introvert? Yeah, that it's just a bit of a
No,
weird.
I think that's actually beautiful, because in a certain sense, entering this world of theatre is, in some sense, surely got to be an act of self-healing. And what we know about clinicians and psychologists is that they enter the field because they want to heal themselves, but very often they don't acknowledge that to themselves, and they become the lesser of their profession as a consequence. Sammy, you have a brief last word for us.
Oh God, sorry, I'll try now. You see, well, look what you do. Okay, so first of all, introvert, no, yes, need solitude to sort of like gain energy as well. But also, introverts observe nature, human beings. We observe, and that's what allows us to interpret. And I mean, we know comedians are often the most depressed people. We've Robin Williams is a prime example. But Barnaby, I want to go back to you, what you spoke about with your clients and yourself, and almost like what is you and what's them. And I will relate it back to the idea that I've always thought art imitates life and life imitates art. And I will find myself often in experiences where I'm going through something personally, and a particular role will come into my experience. And I know it's exactly the thing that I need to help me get through whatever personal experience. And then the opposite is the same. It's like suddenly a role happens and I don't know that I need that role, but then something happens and I am forever changed by the role itself. So what is me? What is the role? What is the role? What is me? It's the same as you, I guess. What's your patient and what's you? So, and then thirdly, I want to say to Tony, what a gift to be able to reprise a role for 15 years, because I know what that's like to be able to. For me, I started with Chicago 2005, and I've just finished the last one in 2026, and I've done it 4 times. And to revisit something and to realize the changes within yourself and how you have grown and how something has changed you and what new stuff about yourself you can bring to the role. There's nothing better. And I don't think many human beings can have that experience the way we do, of being able to see how much you have grown, because you don't get to repeat things like we do. And over years, decades, etc. So hope that's a good ending from me. And to all of you.
I think the 6 of you have given us a wonderful, wonderful gift this evening that I'm hoping when the podcast is uploaded will be heard by many psychotherapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, and all those sorts of people, because some of the things you've taught this evening are absolutely exemplary and necessary, and all too often overlooked by people in the healing professions. I also want to thank Nazia Smith and Sipho for rescuing my technocracy tendencies or technophobic tendencies. And I truly want to thank all 6 of you for a wonderful gift you've given us this evening. Thank you.